Trump, also flew all summer long last year over the beach house of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito. And of course, that news about that flag came just days after we learned that Alito's home in Virginia also displayed an upside-down American flag in the weeks after the violent sacking of the Capitol, another symbol adopted and embraced by Trump's Stop the Steal supporters. In that case, Alito responded to questions from the Times with an emailed statement saying his wife, the wife, hoisted that inverted flag in a dispute with their liberal neighbors. Why? He doesn't say. But in the days since news of this second right-wing flag broke, there has been no response from Alito, no response from the court or its Chief Justice John Roberts, who now faces a growing chorus of voices calling for him to appear before Congress and explain the conduct of the members of his court. That is in addition to calls for Alito, at a minimum, to recuse himself from two hugely consequential January 6th related cases sitting before the Supreme Court over his explicit and obvious violations of regulations on judicial conduct.
If Justice Alito does not recuse himself from the Trump immunity case and the Fisher January 6th case, he will do irreparable damage to the Supreme Court.
He definitively needs to recuse himself.
Well, of course, he should recuse himself from these cases.
At a very minimum, he has to recuse himself.
He should recuse himself from any Trump-related cases.
Now, all this is happening on a day when the Supreme Court was open for business, handing down decisions on cases it heard this spring. It was possible they might even announce some action on one of those cases that people say that Alito should recuse from, Donald Trump's claim that he is immune from prosecution for his attempts to overturn the 2020 election. Now, that's a case that the High Court has sat on for months. In fact, check this out. It has now been 164 days, nearly half a year, since special counsel Jack Smith asked the justices to weigh in immediately on Trump's immunity claims, saying basically, look, I know the Supreme Court's going to want to weigh on this, and the American voting public has a right to know the outcome of Trump's case before the 2024 election. And the court rejected that request, and they waited. And they are slow walking their decision now. So here we are now, nearly half a year later. It's harder and harder to think that someone like Sam Alito, whose household flew flags supporting the insurrection over not one but two of his houses, is in any way qualified to be a person who makes judgments on these cases. The court did not announce a ruling today in the immunity case. Who knows when and if they ever will. But the 6-3 conservative majority, the same conservative majority that destroyed abortion rights in Dobbs, the majority that now boasts multiple members who have flagrantly violated basic judicial ethics, covering everything from undeclared gifts to obvious conflicts of interest to open politicking, all of which apply to all the federal judges below the Supreme Court, that majority threw open the floodgates for Republican-led racial gerrymandering schemes. Court conservatives this time sided with a redistricting plan by South Carolina Republicans that pulled thousands of black voters out of a key battleground district. In a decision that was authored by Samuel Alito, the majority agreed with those Republicans. They weren't trying to disenfranchise voters of color. They were trying to disenfranchise Democrats, and whoopsie, most of them happen to be black. See how that works? It's a decision that will make it easier for Republicans to box out voters of color as long as they can argue their gerrymandering is based on political identity first and race second, a ruling that endangers the basic principle of one person, one vote, another act of right-wing steamrolling that is the apotheosis of what the Trump era has wrought. We keep learning more daily about just how unaccountable they are. When a justice like Sam Alito flies this pro-insurrectionist flag, right-wing flag, not once but twice over his homes, the same flag flown by billionaire Republican donor Leonard Leo, who not only handpicked Trump's Supreme Court nominees, but also Alito and Thomas, and then proceeded to give both of them hundreds of thousands of dollars in gifts, or at least facilitate those, and trips in recent years. They're all part of the same club. I'm just a judge. Supreme Court Justice Sam Alito didn't have to fly those flags to be a true conservative friend of the Trumpist agenda. This is what sticks with me, right? Think about this. I mean, Sam Alito is one of the most powerful reactionaries in the country, arguably the most. His court opinions, speeches, media appearances, he could just do that. Why did he fly the flags? He had to go an extra step and advertise. Take that flag in his vacation home, right? It's a signal from Alito about who he thinks he answers to. He knows he's not supposed to do that. He knows any other judge would get in trouble. You can't do that. But he thinks he answers to no one. We'll see if he's right. At the minimum, it suggests a disturbing readiness to keep pushing past any boundaries, as the movement that Alito is clearly a member of looks to destroy the current American constitutional order. Senator Peter Welch is a Democrat of Vermont who serves on the Judiciary Committee, and he joins me now. Senator, I've seen a number of folks on the right rushing to Alito's defense, which is not surprising because he's a member of their team, which is in some ways the controversy at issue here. But they say, this is much ado about nothing. Do you think it's much ado about nothing?
No, the court is in crisis, and that means our constitutional order is in crisis. Essentially, you have a full-on embrace by the court as a result of a very timid Chief Justice that they can do what they want beyond just making decisions that I profoundly disagree with, but to exhibit conduct that conveys a political orientation. The two flags that you mentioned are very much an endorsement of the January 6th activity. You have, of course, Justice Thomas's wife, who on January 6th was in communication with top aides of President Trump. And this is quite appalling. And, you know, there's two issues here. What can Congress do? We have the authority to pass the White House bill, who's been great on this, because Congress could impose a code of ethics. Practical reality is, with a divided Senate, divided Congress, we probably don't have the capacity to get that done. Chris, my view here is we've got to start focusing on the failure of Chief Justice Roberts to do the job that a Chief Justice has. And that's two things profoundly. One is to build consensus. And the second is to impose standards collectively that protect the integrity and the reputation of the court. And you have a timid leadership here and look at the other way approach by Roberts. And just one last point. When we had the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954 that ended separate but equal, extraordinarily consequential decision, very divisive. It was going to be reacted to in the South by a court of 9 justices, some Republican, some Democrat. It was a unanimous decision. And you didn't have justices flying upside down flags when they were making that decision. So my view here, Congress can do and try, but we're going to have the partisan fight. But I support anything we can do. Chief Justice Roberts has got to accept the burden of responsibility that other Chief Justices have embraced, and that is build consensus and demand ethical standards.
Okay, but in practical terms, I mean, I've heard the notion that I don't even know what the constitutional status of this is, although I think in the court's recent jurisprudence on congressional subpoenas would support enforcement of congressional subpoenas. But, I mean, can you invite Justice Roberts to come before the committee in an open session and explain himself? Seems like someone should do some explaining here.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
we're just gonna hide and let this wash over, and no one can tell us to do anything, even though we're a co-equal branch of government. Seems a little suspect to me.
You want to know something? Chief Justice Roberts owes the Congress and the American people an explanation about what is going on. And Senator Durbin had invited him earlier when some of the Leonard Leo stuff came up. He rejected it. We get into the subpoena question and the capacity to enforce that when we don't have 60 votes in the Senate to do it stymies us. It's very frustrating for us, believe me. But the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, does he not have an obligation to the American people to explain why it is that the 9 justices on the Supreme Court, in contrast to the over 800 justices at the district and appellate courts who are subject to enforceable ethical standards, why those 9 are exempt from them? It's absolutely undercutting the integrity of the court. He's failing in his responsibilities, and he won't step up and do it. But I'm all for inviting him in and let him explain why this is okay.
Senator, are there broader ways that Democrats in the Congress should be conceptualizing a way of reordering the relationship between the branches. I think you can make a case that they've gotten a little out of whack. And this has happened before, and I said this last night to your colleague, Senator Blumenthal, and others, that throughout American history, there's been these moments where the equilibrium between branches has to be resettled. You saw this during the New Deal. You saw it in the run-up to the Civil War. Arguably is one of the causes of the Civil War, a failure to renegotiate that settlement. You saw it during World War II to a certain extent. You saw it during the Warren Court in its own way. Do you think this is one of those moments?
I absolutely do. The Supreme Court needs term limits. They need term limits. They should have 18-year terms. And then every president is going to have an opportunity to make 2 appointments to the Supreme Court. And that allows the people to weigh in, because the people, by deciding who it is they want to be president, are picking a set of values that they see embodied in that person they select. So this indefinite term, and it's gotten so extreme, where you have extremely partisan appointees, especially on the Republican side, where the hearing that validates their nomination is not before the Senate Judiciary Committee, on which I sit. It's before the Leonard Leo Federalist Society.